For those of you who do not know, we used to have our office in Steveston, Richmond, and it was a great destination, but there were a few problems with it. And Richard, time for your list of problems. Go ahead.
Oh boy. Well, they didn't begin as problems. They began as opportunities. Back in 2007, early 2007, Zine and I were walking down, Chatham and Stevenson, just going for a walk. We just needed to get away. And we were talking about, our lease was coming up on our office space elsewhere in Richmond. And we were tired of paying high lease costs. Like, why do that when you could own? And you know, up here is on the corner of Fifth and Chatham, this beautiful little quaint corner office attached to 6 townhouses. It was a mixed commercial residential complex that had just been built, and it was for sale. And there was nothing in it. It was a blank slate. It was literally just a slab inside. And we looked inside and we just imagined what could be. And we said, you know what? We've always thought about Steveston. It's a great little place to locate. It's a nice environment. Could go out for walks all the time, go shopping nearby. And so we put in an offer, and it was accepted. And we ended up building the office of our dreams. And the years went by, and slowly but surely, there started to appear obstacles. We ended up being de facto property managers. Things that went wrong very often, people in the area, in the surrounding townhouses, turned to us for help and fix them because they didn't know what to do. And we had experience in doing stuff. And so that was an obstacle. Continual interruptions, client interruptions were awesome. Clients could come in anytime, but we had a lot of unannounced visitors that would come in, mistaken addresses, neighbors asking us to send faxes, and like it was getting a little bit nuts, and we couldn't control much of it. And we also couldn't control all of the issues that came up. False alarms, being woken up in the morning that an alarm's gone off there, having to head down there, and shoveling snow in the winter. We'd end up being one of the few residences, in the area that would actually shovel snow, and we had to get it done before the shop opened. That's required, and obstacle after obstacle. So in 2019, Zine had the last straw, and I said, "What do you think? What do you think if we sold it? What do you think if we sold the office, moved the office back home? Because most of what we can do can be over Zoom or over a phone call, and we could build out a nice office inside of our house, the way it used to be, right?" And she said, "Can we?" And we started inquiring amongst realtors and stuff, and there's a few hiccups along the way, but we ultimately sold it for a good target price, and we were able to eliminate that problem, eliminate the extra property taxes that came along with that, and things like that, the extra costs, and create the office of our dreams in our home. And lo and behold, COVID hits. We sold it, and then COVID hits. We didn't plan that, okay? But it ended up really, really a good situation because most people are working from home now anyway. And the whole new reality now is people in service businesses like ours, they are working from wherever they're working. They don't need to be actually in an office. And our clients have told us that they like it this way. So it ended up working really well. We controlled what we could control, though, didn't we? Right?
This is true. And this good transition into the topic of this episode. It's controlling what you can control with your finances. Now, one of my favorite books is Seven Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. But within that, he has a concept called the circle of influence versus the
Mm-hmm.
circle of concern. And the circle of concern is kind of those things that, take up space in our mind, such as global warming, the economy, the people driving around you. You know what? These are often things that bother us, but we can't do anything about. And then there's the circle of influence, which is actually the things we can control. Generally, we can control our actions, what we say, what we think, and how we respond to things out of our control. Richard, what are some examples of things in your circle of concern that you can't control?
Wow. Um, I mean, the obvious things, you can't control the weather, you can't, but let's let's narrow it down to the investment sphere, right?
Okay.
I can't control what kind of political events happen around the world. I can't control if a country happens to invade another country, and that creates, stress in the financial markets. I can't control if a country defaults on its debt. I I can't control if a particular industry happens to have a severe setback, right? So let's say, for instance, technology companies that have been going on a phenomenal trajectory, and all of a sudden, investors realizing that the growth just isn't what we expected it would be. Well, that new news emerges. There's an emergence of new news. It's where the word emergency comes from, right? The emergence of something. And all of a sudden, we realize that, okay, I can't expect that growth. Therefore, I have to sell that stock. And that stock gets drawn down. I can't control that. I can't control what kind of monetary policy is going to exist in the world to combat rising inflation. Okay, which causes bond prices to drop because central banks are going to increase interest rates to stem inflation, which causes existing bond yields to not be favorable to investors. So, therefore, those bonds have to be valued at a discount. The bond markets drop substantially. I can't control that happened, and nobody else could. There's the news flash. It's evident. The news flash is that nobody knows what coming events will bring.
Hmm.
And
And
when there are sorry?
I think that's an important part because so many people put bets on the market or they forecast where the market's going to go, like a crystal ball type thing. The unfortunate thing about when people do that, and honestly, that's a big misconception of our industry. It's you should be able to forecast where this is going. You should be able to pick the next winners. The unfortunate thing is when you take that position, number one, you're betting against the market, and we know that the market there's what $900 billion flows through the market and is transacted on the market every day. So it's a lot of volume. But at the same time, we know that if you take a position on something, you're either right or you're wrong.
Yep. You know, investors never plan on losing money. So people don't buy stocks intending to lose money in a stock. And a lot of people might say, okay, why are you buying that particular stock, which has just taken a huge hit and its future looks abysmal? Why are you buying that stock? Well, that investor is not buying that stock in order to lose money. That investor is instead buying that stock in order to anticipate that the future will change for that company, and that investor is willing to be rewarded for the higher level of risk that they take in buying that stock. But any intelligent investor is not purporting to know the future or think they know the future, but they're willing to take calculated risks in order to get a superior rate of return. And I think that's really, really important because stocks in general right now, some people might think that they're priced imperfectly. I don't believe so. I believe the science tells us that stocks today are priced in order to reflect the consensus of what the market thinks that company is worth. And it's not up to us individually to say that's right nor wrong. I'd rather just assume that free enterprise works, buy a broad cross selection of all those different securities, and let free enterprise grow that over time.
Yeah, I think one relevant example is actually one of our favorite experiments, which is called the jelly bean experiment.
Yeah.
So you imagine a bunch of people in a conference, and this has been done many times. There's a jar of jelly beans on a table in the middle, and people have to guess how many jelly beans are in it. You know what? Everyone puts in a guess. They might be close, they might not be close. There's always outliers that need to be eliminated. You know, the people who are like, hey, there's a jar of jelly beans. I bet there's only one jelly bean in there. Like, come on, come on. And then there's there's outliers on the other side. But what we found is the more people participating in the guessing, the closer and closer you actually get to the true number in of jelly beans in the jar. And the stock market actually works a lot like that.
It absolutely does. And the funny thing is, in that jelly bean experiment, it's been done time and time again, that if you take a look at the consensus of opinion, the average of the count that people guess inside, it usually generally is no more than a variance of 5% either way from the actual count of the jelly beans. So the wisdom of the masses is far greater than any each one opinion on its own.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Now,
for sure.
what we're really trying to get at in this episode is, you know what? There is that circle of concern, the things that we cannot control. And there's the circle of influence, which are things that we actually can control. Now, if we focus on the things that we can control, we can be proactive. Um, we can really focus on what we can control and make a real difference there. Um, if we focus on what we can't control, we're more emotionally reactive. We feel like we don't have control over things, and we feel like everything is how do I put this? Kind of, we're like a victim of
Yeah.
outside circumstances. A favorite example that I like to give, it's like yelling at a TV during a game and hoping that you're going to influence the outcome of the game. Like there's yes, you might. How do I put this? You're expending time and energy and worry and frustration at the game, but you're not actually changing anything.
Well, there is a
So
little bit of a benefit. There's a bit of a benefit there because it's kind of cathartic.
that's
Okay,
true.
it's
You're
like
right.
I can. It's like that primal scream thing that people do. That
Yeah.
can be quite cathartic. But yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't affect the outcome at all. No, not at all.
So what we're really trying to do is people might be asking themselves, and especially when we're worried about our finances, what can I do to control my financial future? Um, when we feel out of control, what does that do to us, really, when it comes to our finances? What do you think it does to us?
We feel a great amount of stress,
Hmm.
not having control. Um, I'll give you an example. You're driving down the highway at 120K. You take your hand off the steering wheel, and the car starts shimmying around and swerving all over the place. You then try to take control of something that is behaving crazy erratically, and it makes it even worse. You're trying to correct the wheel when you should be leaving it alone, and so on and so forth. So you end up crashing into a ditch, right? Because you don't have control over the situation, even though you're trying to take control of it.
Hmm.
And an erratic market in the face of global inflation, in the face of a war in Eastern Europe, in the face of supply chain constraints, trying to control, the investing situation there is like trying to grab a hold of that wheel while your car is careening
Yeah.
uncontrolled down the road.
It's disheartening, right?
Yeah.
Maybe this is a good example. So I'm my father is German, so we have specific.
Well, I'm Canadian,
You're sorry, you're Canadian, but
but
also
German background. Yeah.
yeah. So we have certain opinions on road etiquette. And you could get frustrated at people not following the rules of the road, which is, that's very typical. But at the same time, what can you control? You can only control your own driving,
Mhm.
and you can only control your own safety, and you can only control what you're doing. So I think that's a pretty good example. But
Well, I can keep
really,
my hands on the wheel,
yes,
in
that's
order to avoid careening out of control for one thing,
yeah.
and and maintain control along the way rather than taking my hand off the wheel in order to send a text or something like that,
Yeah.
right? I can follow the rules of the road.
And by being reactive and focusing on what we can't control, we might even feel like we can't do anything to change our future or to set ourselves up for a good future when we actually can. Um, I think the major point that I want to get through is it's very discouraging when we are powerless. And the truth of the matter is that our lives are a result of the choices we have made in our life. Now, we all have, it depends on the circumstance and everything. We all encounter unfortunate circumstances in our life, but within those unfortunate circumstances, we can still control how we react to them and what we do going forward. Um, so let's think about, I know we went over the stock markets and things that we can't control. So the economy, global warming, stock markets, pandemic, what's happening with the people around us, how people around us are spending their money. We can't control any of that. But let's focus on the things that we can actually control to build our financial future and freedom. When we focus on the things that we can control, we can actually make effective changes. And when we start making effective changes and focusing on the things that we can control and influence, you'll find that your abilities and capabilities actually grow more. And that's a huge thing.
You know, I want to go back to the car analogy,
Hmm.
right? Things I can control um, generally have to do with that steering wheel that my hands are supposed to be on. Okay. I can control where I'm going. Okay. So I can say, this is my destination. I need to get there. And I can be purposeful in my decision on where that is. And I can control the path that it takes to get there in many degrees. There's going to be sometimes I'm going to need to detour. Like there's going to be, like a power line down, and I'm going to need to take a detour off of a side highway and take the other way around and stuff. But I will get to my destination because I'm purposeful in that. Okay.
Hmm.
But you know what I can't control? I can't control things by going forward by looking at the rearview mirror.
Yes.
Like
But you also can't.
I can't have
y-
my eyes firmly on that rearview mirror and expect to not get into an accident going forward, because
Yes.
that's and that's why I get so frustrated. And Matt, I actually get angry
Yeah.
at not at investors who do that, but I get angry when I see in our industry, not all the time, but I see cases of advisors steering clients towards certain investments by taking a look at how they did in the past.
Yeah.
Okay. And saying, oh, they've been doing this, or they did this, therefore they are doing this now, which is untrue. It's patently
Hmm.
untrue. And they will continue doing this going forward, which is completely untrue. You don't know that. You don't have the gift of foresight, of prophecy, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And here's maybe a good point to add to this. We know that I think about 21% of managers actually outperform the market on a 5-year basis. But what we also know is 21% of that 21%
Yeah.
will continue to outperform the market.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's taking a big chance with clients' money, trying to move and trying to find the best returns based on past performance, and without having a focus on investment mythology and stuff like that. Methodology. I said mythology.
Yeah. 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 Okay. So
Um,
we've said that we can't gauge an investment's performance going forward by what it's done in the past. But that's not to say that we can't establish patterns of what the dynamics are. We
mhm,
know for a fact that in the long run, over thousands and thousands of years, free enterprise has worked, Matt. There's no denying that. Like anything that has occurred of substance in society has been a result of free market forces. Okay. Individuals in the marketplace creating value out of basic materials and selling it for a profit and trading amongst each other and in negotiating in trade amongst each other. That has worked over time better than people sticking their money underneath their mattress, for
mhm,
instance. And lending has also worked. So, people. buying bonds where governments and companies are borrowing money from you. That's worked, not to as great effect, but it's all a function of we have been able to earn increasing levels of return in return for correspondingly higher levels of risk that we're willing to undertake.
Yeah.
And that goes in fits and spurts, but
Yeah.
that is something that we can control, that to a large extent in the long run that will work in your favor in a portfolio,
Yeah.
right?
Now, there's one more thing about focusing on things that we can't control. We drain our energy and time. And often the mindsets that go along with that is associated with negativity and being
Hmm.
overly critical.
Yeah.
So it's tough because, especially in this day and age, it's so easy to be overwhelmed by all the things trying to get our attention. You just think of all the media, all the advertising. You need to buy this, buy, sell, blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. Especially in this age of information when it's so readily available, I think people lose track of, rather than knowing it, it's what to do with that information, how to implement that information, which is that's actually the hardest part now. Would you agree with that?
Definitely, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so let's get to the good news. What can we control about our financial future and plans? I'll list a few and maybe we could talk about more.
Hmm.
Number one, our spending. What can we control about our spending?
I can spend less than I earn.
Hmm.
You know, that's the number one rule of financial freedom over time, is spend less than you earn. Okay.
Yeah.
So number one is spending. I can, I mean, there's nothing wrong with wanting what you want,
Yeah.
but not beyond what your current capabilities are.
Yes.
So if I want the ability to spend more, I can create greater capability. That can mean by investing in my career, investing in increasing skills, um, having a side gig, things like that. There are things that I control about
Yeah.
adding to the top line rather than just focusing on the bottom line. But
Yeah.
also, I can be incredibly economical in how I allocate my spending,
Hmm.
for sure.
Another thing we could control, and you just mentioned this, is our income.
Yeah.
So there are a few things that we could do to control our income, um, especially in this abundant world of opportunity. There's millions of side gigs that people can look for and opportunities to grow their income there. Another thing that people can control is their saving,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Like you can control how much you're saving.
Can you control it if the savings is an afterthought of your spending?
No, because
No.
that's kind of reactive, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind
Yeah.
of like, oh, I'll save what's left over. And that's unfortunately, you don't put your financial future and your saving first. You don't pay yourself first,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
That's like saying
And then,
we'll have a meal tomorrow because we'll have leftovers from today. Well, sometimes there might be something left over, but I might be hungry today and there might not be anything tomorrow, you know? So
that's a,
we can't control that, but I
yeah.
can definitely control it if I take that would have been leftovers and allocate it into the fridge for
Hmm.
tomorrow's consumption, right?
Yeah. Another thing that we can control is we alluded to this, is our investment philosophy. So, um, we love our evidence based approach to investing because we have the data that suggests how we can interact with every market, right? What are your thoughts on this?
Um, we know what we can control. Okay,
Yeah.
we know that there's a free lunch in investing. We say there's no free lunch, but there is a free lunch. We can reduce overall risk through diversification, through massive diversification. If I own one stock in a blue chip growth company that pays good dividends, One might say that's all that I need. But the graveyard of investing is littered with all kinds of companies that uh, have gone by the wayside and left investors high and dry. So what do? We diversify. And what that does is it takes the risk of just having one company, spreads it amongst many different companies, not just in that same sector, but in other different sectors. And if one goes down, you know what? We got all the rest to lean
Mhm.
on and we're going to be okay. So diversification is something that we can control.
And this goes back to our favorite analogy is, do you want a trophy fish or do you want to feed your family? The
For
chances
sure.
of you catching a trophy fish is very slim, but if there's a goal of feeding your family, well, it's a different goal. Like you can't risk not getting anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing we control, Matt, is understanding where returns actually come from. And I alluded to it before, is that we are rewarded commensurately for risks that are willing to undertake in order to get a better rate of return. I'll give you a big example, and I mentioned one before. Large growth stocks. Okay. Well, there's a certain amount of safety there, right? Because these companies are big. Some might say too big to fail. Okay, we know that takes us down the wrong road once in a while too, because they do fail as well. But they're less likely to fail just because of their massive size, and they will give us a lower rate of return. Like historically, we know that large growth stocks in the S&P 500 in the past century have given us a rate of return of about 9%. Okay, in that area. Well, we can take an extra step forward and say, okay, well, if we don't focus just on the growth stocks, we can focus on the profitable stocks, because growth stocks aren't necessarily as profitable because they're reinvesting for growth in a certain market. But let's take, for instance, like a utility of some sort. Well, there's not much room for growth other than through acquisition and different things like that, but there might not be room there either. So, but they're immensely profitable on a regular basis, but no great future. So the fact is, profitable, maybe lower valued companies have generated extra returns for us. Okay, because we haven't been betting on these exponential futures, but which very often go awry. We have been betting on that consistency of cash flow, that regular income coming in, that regular
Yeah.
profitability, and we'll invest in those, and we'll get about 11%. And if we want to
Yeah.
take it a step further, we can invest in smaller companies that have greater
Yes.
risk, right?
Yeah.
And we've gotten maybe 13, 14% in the long run on those companies, but greater risk, greater and greater risk.
Yeah. That's a great point. I The problem, and you mentioned this very important fact of betting on the long-term growth
Yeah.
of a growth company. You know what? Here's the thing about taking a position on that. It could happen, but it also could not happen. And
Hmm.
what, especially when we're planning for our financial futures, do we want to be putting bets like that in place?
Big example of that was in the late 1990s when internet search engines were all coming up, and we were placing bets on tons of different search engines. There and there are too many to list actually, because everybody had a different way of searching stuff on the internet. And we poured billions of dollars of investor capital into all of them. And along comes one company and changes the game for everybody and decimates
Yeah.
them all. And that, of course,
Yeah.
is a household name. It's Google, right?
Yeah.
Did we
And
see that coming? We didn't see it coming.
And the scary thing is, as you were saying, there's many, for example, in the search engines, there was many that was being put into play, but ultimately nobody could have back then nobody could have predicted the force that Google would be today,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And that's playing a
Well,
major bet.
and it relates back to a word that religious people will use often: prophecy, right?
Hmm.
I call it financial prophecy. The fact is, people have a misunderstanding of what prophets actually did in those times. They didn't necessarily foretell the future. They told people what they need to do today.
Hmm.
Okay? So the fact is, there are the only people we can identify that have successfully timed the markets or have successfully foretold the future have been people who've done it out of sheer luck. And the only way we can identify them is through the rearview mirror, because they are the ones that history remembers, compared to the 100 times more people who got it wrong. Okay, so that's a form of, I believe we call it selection bias, isn't it, Matt?
Yep.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes. Okay. Another thing that we can control is our discipline when
yes.
it comes to investing. And this is, of course, the difficult one because we know how difficult it is to be disciplined. But I think this goes hand in hand with having an investment philosophy that will keep you in the market and you can follow a philosophy that you can follow through the ups and downs for peace of mind toward your financial goals. Because let's be honest here. I always love that phrase, time in the market is better than timing the market.
100%. Yeah.
And of course, we always go back to the Warren Buffett example where his biggest advantage has been his time in the market.
He's one of
There's
the
a
oldest investors in the world, not in terms of his sheer age, but the fact that he started so young. He started as a
Mhm,
teenager, as a young
mhm.
teenager.
So, and let's go back to this example of investing. Uh, Investing is very emotional, but we are not wired for to make decisions, to make disciplined investing decisions,
Yeah.
especially with the ups and downs of the market. Okay, so are there any things that we can control with our financial future? Any other things that we haven't mentioned?
I think one thing that we can do is, and you mentioned discipline, but a subset of discipline is we're always wondering when the right time to invest is, right? And I relate back to a conversation that I just had online with a client who sent me an email saying, "Hey, can you send me like a current portfolio review?" Okay. Because he was concerned with where the markets were. And I sent him back the portfolio review, and he was surprised at, like I did okay. I said, "Guess what? That's dollar cost averaging in action." "Really?" I said, "Yeah. Over the past couple of years, especially the past year during the huge volatility in the markets, you have been consistently putting in $500 per month into your portfolio. And for a young man like him, and this was a relatively new portfolio, that meant a lot. It meant that that 500 per month was buying a lot of units when the markets were down. So he had a really good positive rate of return over that time through disciplined, consistent action in his portfolio.
Yeah, yeah, and of course, this goes without saying because work within a financial plan.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing, um, especially if you're looking at the long term.
Well, and getting
Because
back to that, sorry, getting back to that question you had about additional things to control, you mentioned it. It's the plan. It comes right back down to it, because the thing you can control is your goals.
Mhm,
And when you, not just in your head, because so many people in Canada say they have a financial plan, but it's in their head. No, you don't got a plan. Okay. You actually have to put it down on paper or in a digital form so you can look at it and be very purposeful at it. When you look at that plan, you know exactly where you want to go. It's an amazing thing that happens in this universe is that when you are purposeful and intentional on stating where you want to go, it'll occupy your subconscious and
mhm.
it'll occupy your conscious mind, and it
Yeah,
will act as your guide to, okay, that's my destination. I can I can now figure out what I need to do now. But if I don't have a destination, I don't know what to do. I wake up in the morning, I haven't a clue what to do, but I've got a goal of moving forward towards that goal right there. And I
Yeah.
know exactly what needs to be done because it's all in my plan.
Yeah. And I think uh, one thing that we'll leave people with is we have a evergreen webinar, and it's our 10 steps to 10x your financial freedom webinar. It's on our website. You can find a time at any time that's convenient for you and join this webinar because it really shows you what to do. Rather than all the information, it will show you what and how to do it. I think, again, going back to that example, there's so much information out there. The tough thing is applying it.
Well,
And
Matt,
that's the one thing you can control.
one thing I love about that instant response webinar that we have is that number one, it's available to all. And some might be thinking, okay, so it's a recorded webinar. Well, yes and no. Okay. The actual presentation, yeah, it's recorded, but we are live. Like we are there for you. That webinar is hooked up to a chat channel that we have. That we have open. So when people have questions in the middle of a webinar, we're going to get back to them with answers very quickly. Plus, there's a lot of very interactive downloadable content. There are all kinds of resources that you can access. It's actually a more interactive webinar than many live webinars we've seen. So the feedback's been phenomenal. I would really encourage people to take that webinar.
All right. So we're going to control what we can control. And with that, let's control the ending of this episode. Goodbye, Richard. Thank you for the
Thanks.
conversation.
Thanks, Matt. This has been great.